Finally home, I thought as I closed the front door behind me. End of the week. What could be better? Perhaps only a vacation. I placed my bags in the entryway, kicked off my sneakers, and proceeded to the kitchen, intent on raiding the refrigerator. Determining how to enhance my evening required minimal contemplation. Precisely for this purpose, I had stocked up at the local beer shop. My hand steadily filled an empty mug with cool, foamy liquid. This specific form of leisure had been my Friday routine for quite some time. Occasionally friends or acquaintances would join me for company, but not always. This evening followed the established pattern. As usual, I powered up my computer, donned headphones, and immersed myself in virtual reality. The contents of my mug gradually diminished while my body began to slacken. Perhaps from fatigue, perhaps from alcohol, or possibly a combination of factors. I surrendered to this sensation, relaxing completely in my chair while absent-mindedly viewing a live stream. Suddenly, I sensed something crash heavily onto the kitchen floor. Indeed, I sensed rather than heard it, as my headphones prevented me from detecting the actual sound of the fall. However, the impact generated vibrations of sufficient magnitude for me to perceive them. Truthfully, investigating the noise source by leaving my room felt intimidating, despite my generally courageous nature. Cautiously removing my headphones and placing them on the desk, I tiptoed into the depths of my apartment. "I don't understand," I muttered while scratching the back of my head. Both kitchen and corridor remained perfectly orderly. Perhaps something had fallen in my neighbor's apartment, or possibly in the stairwell. I approached the peephole but observed nothing unusual on the landing, and frankly lacked motivation to venture into the hallway itself. Never mind, I reasoned. Let the ceiling collapse if it must, but my beer wouldn't consume itself. With this thought, I reached the refrigerator and extracted a condensation-covered bottle. However, finishing my beer that evening proved impossible. For unknown reasons, my mood deteriorated following those loud noises. Initially, I experienced persistent impressions of someone standing in my room, later evolving to sensations of this entity breathing directly onto my neck. Eventually overwhelmed, I exited the building for fresh air. While not particularly delighted by this development, I acknowledged having neglected outdoor excursions for an extended period. The thought occurred that perhaps I should venture outside more frequently. Potentially, I might even encounter a romantic prospect and abandon drinking altogether. Mentally, I promised myself definitive lifestyle changes, not immediately, but starting Monday. Evidently, the fresh air positively influenced me, as I retired to bed around 11 rather than my customary 1 o'clock. Perhaps transformation into a different person awaited me soon. Who could say? This constituted my final thought before losing consciousness. I would have slept until morning had strange sounds not intervened. In my dream, someone scrubbed a stain from a mirror, producing a distinctive sound. This noise proved so irritating that my sleep abruptly terminated. Upon opening my eyes, I sharply inhaled and subsequently remained silent. This reaction stemmed from hearing an identical sound emanating from the corridor. However, this phenomenon persisted for merely a fraction of a second. Somewhat dumbfounded by these occurrences, I peered into the corridor after activating the light switch. Yet my courage dissipated with lightning speed. The lamp illuminated momentarily before shattering into fragments, not burning out, but physically disintegrating. "Lord, help me," my whisper disrupted the silence. Never having believed in supernatural phenomena, I now recalled horror films and tales overheard somewhere. My mind immediately conjured monstrous images resembling jump scares or entities from zombie films or resurrections of the deceased. I stood immobile, straining to hear through the silence, detecting only the buzzing in my ears and my heartbeat's pounding. The precise duration before I finally ventured into the corridor remains uncertain. I refrained from activating the lights, relying instead on my phone's flashlight. After examining the corridor, bathroom, and kitchen without discovering anything unusual, I eventually activated the corridor light. Unlike the bedroom fixture, the entryway lamp functioned normally. How peculiar, I reflected. First an unpleasant dream, then a burst lamp. Coincidental, perhaps, but remarkably so. I returned to bed but prudently left the corridor light illuminated. Sleep endured uninterrupted until midday. I intended to rise early, but ultimately surrendered to the weekend privilege of extended rest. After lingering in bed, my stomach eventually issued a resonant reminder regarding the necessity of breakfast. It produced an elongated rumble which I interpreted as a directive to action, prompting my preparation of a morning meal consisting of fried eggs and several cheese sandwiches. Following my nutritional intake, I experienced a desire for additional repose, thus returning to my bed while contemplating potential activities for the day. A mental note formed regarding grocery procurement, as refrigerator contents had diminished, and additionally, acquisition of a replacement light bulb seemed prudent. The thought regarding illumination devices abruptly halted my cognitive processes. A metaphorical illumination occurred within my consciousness, reminding me that corridor lighting should remain activated. Rising from bed with unsteady limbs, I observed the entrance area remained unilluminated, with the switch positioned contrary to expectations. Multiple toggle attempts confirmed the light had been deactivated, despite my certainty of having avoided contact with the switch since nightfall. Instead of proceeding to the grocery establishment, necessity dictated visiting an electronics retailer to purchase surveillance equipment. At home, I engaged in camera installation procedures, apparently with success. This arrangement provided remote monitoring capabilities, enabling workplace observation of domestic occurrences. The surveillance acquisition somewhat alleviated my apprehension. Ultimately, apartment activities would become observable. My situation presented precisely two possibilities. Either an unauthorized entity accessed my residence, or my psychological stability was compromised. Neither alternative offered particular comfort, truthfully. Sunday proceeded without notable incident. I engaged in routine activities without further anomalous observations. Monday found me departing for employment, firmly intending to review surveillance recordings. Plans, however, deviated from expectations. My intentions rapidly dissipated. Workplace conditions suggested collective derangement among colleagues. My partner and I faced project completion requirements I had entirely overlooked. The workday extended until 9:00, significantly beyond the standard 6:00 conclusion characteristic of weekly termination. The compensation increase provided minimal consolation. I returned home in a state of extreme fatigue, succumbing to sleep without evening sustenance. The entire work week maintained this intensive pattern. Even Saturday required professional engagement, though mercifully concluding at midday rather than extending into evening hours. Upon returning home, recollection of the surveillance system prompted its utilization. Initial recording content appeared predictable. This particular camera incorporated motion detection functionality, recording exclusively when detecting proximate movement. Throughout the majority of the week, it remained in dormant status. However, Friday recordings captured activity during my absence from the premises. Given my solitary living arrangement, this observation caused considerable physiological distress, manifested as scalp tingling. One perspective suggested the residential occurrences represented genuinely terrifying phenomena. Alternatively, mere coincidental circumstances might offer sufficient explanation. Reasonable assessment suggested potential misinterpretation of events. The crashing sound could be attributed to my inebriated neighbor's activities. This particular individual frequently engages in disruptive behavior, creating various disturbances within his dwelling. These range from excessive audio volume continuing until dawn, to chaotic activities, to vocal projections directed at imperceptible entities. Nocturnal auditory anomalies might have penetrated my semi-conscious state. Lamp failure represents a relatively common occurrence. Camera activation through motion detection hardly warrants surprise given its minimal cost. These rationalizations restored my equilibrium, revealing my tendency toward self-induced anxiety. A strategy of relaxation seemed appropriate, prompting another alcohol procurement expedition. The weekend's conclusion justified such indulgence. After purchasing supplies at the supermarket, I returned home. My intention regarding lifestyle improvements remained unrealized, apparently destined for perpetual deferment. Having poured beer into a glass, I positioned myself in the kitchen before the television, selecting a channel at random. The broadcast featured extraterrestrial civilization content. Occasional screen imagery depicted alien physiognomy. These representations adhered to conventional depictions. Classic green complexion, protruding black ocular features, and minimalist nasal structures characterized these portrayals. Entirely predictable representations. Either the program lacked engaging content or occupational fatigue influenced my perception, as unconsciousness overtook me at the table while maintaining contact with the beer vessel. This state would have persisted had biological necessity not demanded urinary relief. Rising from the couch with limited motor coordination, I navigated by tactile means towards sanitary facilities. An expletive escaped my lips. Momentarily, I perceived observational presence from beyond the corner. This manifestation appeared not as complete corporeal form but merely a cranial structure. The apparition resembled a child's head peering from the corridor. Its proportions seemed distorted or inappropriate. The entity featured ocular structures of extraordinary dimensions. Indeed, these were so substantial that the eyeballs extended beyond orbital cavities. Additionally, it displayed an excessively broad, checkmark-shaped smile. Extraordinary indeed. The ill-advised nature of consuming extraterrestrial-themed media before bedtime became apparent. Having completed necessary functions, I retired to bed. Morning brought full comprehension of the situation's horrific implications. While coincidental explanation remained possible, the accumulation of evidence exceeded reasonable probability thresholds. Attempting to review surveillance recordings proved futile, as examination revealed nothing available for review. The documentation had vanished through apparently inexplicable means. A profane maternal reference accompanied my demand for explanations. In frustration, I propelled a randomly selected object toward the camera. The device disintegrated into fragments, rendering it permanently inoperative. Resolution became imperative. Religious intervention seemed inadequate given temporal constraints, nor did such measures promise effective problem resolution. Additional surveillance acquisition seemed pointless. Previous attempts had proven ineffective. Perhaps psychiatric consultation would prove beneficial. Mental illness remained a possibility. While my parents demonstrated psychological stability, my grandmother experienced cognitive deterioration in advanced age. With considerable effort, I secured a psychiatric appointment despite weekend scheduling limitations. The following day after employment, I proceeded not homeward but directly to medical consultation. A female practitioner of middle age, exhibiting facial expressions suggestive of disinterest, received my symptomatic description. "Do you have any chronic conditions?" "No." "Well, just allergies, if anything." "I see. Have you previously consulted a psychiatrist?" "No." "Did your parents suffer from any relevant medical conditions?" "Not that I am aware of." "Certainly none of them were institutionalized in psychiatric facilities." "Any head trauma history?" "Yes. I experienced a concussion 2 years ago." "Understood. I'll prescribe medication for you. Complete this treatment course. Should concerns persist, schedule another appointment with me." "Agreed." I rendered substantial payment to the receptionist for the consultation. My destination became the nearest pharmacy. Following several days of medication administration, my physiological system began exhibiting resistance. Frequent cranial discomfort manifested. Occasional episodes of debilitation occurred. The physician indicated these might represent pharmaceutical side effects. Indeed, I was prepared to endure such consequences. The primary objective remained elimination of the supernatural presence from my residence. During one evening, I engaged in potato preparation in the kitchen while monitoring a musical television channel. Headphone usage proved impractical during culinary activities and general household maintenance. Consequently, the kitchen television provided significant convenience. Without warning, A musical composition I found particularly irritating commenced playing. Initial consideration suggested ignoring it, but this proved unsuccessful. The desire to alter the channel ultimately outweighed my inclination toward indifference. Upon turning to retrieve the remote control from the table to select alternative programming, I experienced complete immobilization. For a fractional moment, a grotesque entity appeared from beyond the corner. The identical creature featuring disproportionately enlarged ocular structures and cranial dimensions. I propelled the remote control forward and bent to retrieve it, yet observed no presence. This necessitated additional professional consultation regarding these occurrences. This medication demonstrates cumulative efficacy. Hallucinations should completely cease approximately 14 days into treatment. Possibly your condition has improved marginally, though insufficiently for personal detection. I concluded the medical professional possessed superior knowledge and refrained from disputation. However, I recognized the substantial nature of my psychological deterioration. Subsequently, this visage appeared ubiquitously, albeit with one notable peculiarity. Visual manifestations occurred exclusively within apartment confines. Its presence became universally apparent. Observations included open windows, ventilation system corners, and on one occasion, the microwave appliance. I withheld these developments from medical reporting, fearing institutional commitment. However, continued progression would necessitate voluntary surrender. One Friday evening found me situated in the kitchen before the television. The prescribed pharmaceutical regimen prohibited alcohol consumption. Alternative recreational activities remained undeveloped in my behavioral repertoire. Thus, I maintained stationary position before the electronic entertainment device. Suddenly, movement within the ventilation aperture captured my attention. "Oh, creature!" This exclamation escaped involuntarily. Evidently, the pharmaceutical intervention proved ineffective. Conversely, it appeared to exacerbate my condition. Once again, the disproportionately enlarged cranial structure appeared. However, unlike previous manifestations, it persisted beyond momentary perception. This entity proceeded from the ventilation system into my kitchen environment. Its mere locomotion induced full body contractions reflecting my terror. The movement pattern exhibited intermittent characteristics. The entity appeared to gather momentum before advancing rapidly. This was followed by brief stationary periods. My observation continued in transfixed fashion, incapable of visual disengagement. This response stemmed not from aesthetic appreciation but rather paralytic fear, comparable to a cervid confronted by an oncoming vehicle. Through spasmodic movements, the entity approached from the ventilation system toward my position. A significant detail became apparent: corporal absence. Extending from the cranial structure was a cord-like appendage of soiled beige coloration, approximately shoelace thickness. Upon complete descent, it proceeded toward me with identical jerking motions, eliciting my vocalization. Somehow managing to ascend the windowsill, I disrupted a violet plant housed in a clay container. The vessel fractured upon impact with the floor, revealing dark soil beneath. I grasped the window handle, attempting manipulation despite the 9-story elevation below. The mechanism resisted operational efforts. The illumination began fluctuating before kitchen darkness descended. Subsequently, complete power termination affected all electrical appliances. The entity vanished, prompting my immediate departure toward the corridor. En route, my smallest toe painfully collided with the doorframe. With extreme vocalization, I entered the building hallway where neighbors had already congregated on the landing. Heavens, why such shouting? Is a power outage so distressing? Or did you cause this disruption? My neighbor bombarded me with inquiries. My apologies, Tatiana. The situation involves, essentially, personal embarrassment. Horror film viewing resulted in soiled trousers. A young man concluded with hoarse laughter. Get lost, I retorted. Listen. Goal, mind your communication with elders. He confronted me aggressively. Please cease this interaction. Tatiana interrupted our dispute. Coinciding with her statement, hallway illumination resumed. Despite electrical restoration, residential occupation held no appeal that night. I collected personal belongings and secured hotel accommodation. Morning arrived without the customary coffee ritual. I contemplated potential courses of action. My residence now hosted this entity. Alternatively, pharmaceutical intervention merely intensified hallucinatory experiences. Determining sufficiency, I discontinued medication administration. Consideration turned toward securing alternative accommodations. Following thoughtful analysis, I elected to seek accommodation with my parental figures. The expenses associated with leasing had become wholly untenable, particularly as mortgage obligations already absorbed a considerable fraction of my earnings. The financial burden of apartment rental had reached prohibitive levels. My maternal and paternal hosts, as expected, provided temporary lodging. They observed, however, that my corporeal presentation exhibited significant deterioration. Their observation contained complete veracity. My physical state was undeniably compromised. Wrinkled attire, orbital bruising, unshaven facial surfaces, and neuromuscular irregularity. Every external indicator suggested personal circumstances of marked inadequacy. I communicated misinformation to my progenitors, suggesting professional overcommitment. Throughout the initial temporal segment, I maintained anticipatory vigilance regarding adverse possibilities and insisted upon continuous illumination during periods of unconsciousness. Eventually, apprehension diminished as anomalous phenomena remained absent. The residential space exhibited entirely conventional characteristics, free from unexpected auditory stimuli, consistent in electrical supply, and significantly, devoid of terrifying biological entities. Initially in numerous days, adequate somnolence and hygienic restoration became achievable. The experiential pleasure of 9 sequential hours of unconsciousness followed by 60 minutes of aquatic immersion represented exceptional satisfaction. Following approximately 14 diurnal cycles, parental suggestions regarding alternative housing arrangements became increasingly evident. Subsequently, direct interrogation regarding my primary residential circumstances occurred. Evaluating all evidential components, I formulated the determination to reoccupy my original habitation. Unusual manifestations had terminated concurrent with cessation of psychopharmacological intervention. Rational analysis suggested absence of domestic threat, though preventative strategies remained advisable. I orchestrated my residential return early in the Saturday diurnal cycle, fully prepared for potential confrontation with the anomalous entity. Should pharmaceutical causation prove accurate, paranormal phenomena would remain absent. Conversely, confirmation of the entity's objective existence would justify eradication attempts. I procured defensive instrumentation in the form of an ornamental bladed implement, subjected to meticulous sharpening, and initiated surveillance. Following multiple nocturnal observation periods, I approached the conclusion that prescribed chemical compounds had altered perceptual functioning. This assessment proved erroneous. Visual perception detected peripheral kinetic activity originating within the connective passageway. The entity exhibited directional movement toward my position. I promptly initiated electronic illumination, anticipating potential disruption of electrical service, while securing the defensive instrument with physiologically compromised manual appendages. Psychological distress reached extreme intensity, threatening consciousness maintenance. Concurrently, the supernatural manifestation maintained deliberate advancement. I executed rapid vertical displacement from the reclining surface, orienting the weapon toward the approaching phenomenon. The entity appeared to recognize existential jeopardy and, altering directional trajectory, proceeded toward culinary quarters. It demonstrated superior evasive mobility. Maintaining extended manual positioning of the weapon resulted in collision with architectural barriers. The entity capitalized upon this temporary disadvantage and accessed the ventilation infrastructure. Conceptual resolution materialized through autonomous cognitive processes. I reinstated electronic monitoring systems throughout the residential environment, installed restrictive barriers at ventilation access points, applied insect preventative screens at fenestrations, and re-established parental cohabitation for an additional hebdomadal period. During this interval, the residential space remained free from extraordinary occurrences, suggesting habitability despite persistent psychological resistance. With complete candor, solitary occupation of confined architectural space following such experiences generated significant anxiety. Consequently, reoccupation occurred with quadrupedal companionship. Long-standing interest in domestic fauna coincided with practical necessity. On the hebdomadal day of rest, I patronized an animal welfare institution and selected a mature domestic feline. The creature, designated Chernish, demonstrated immediate social affinity. Avoiding excessive selectivity, I facilitated its relocation. The feline entered residential quarters without hesitation and, eschewing formal permission, established immediate occupation of my sleeping surface. This arrangement proved acceptable. The diurnal period concluded without incident, as did the subsequent nocturnal interval. Restorative unconsciousness occurred successfully, enabling occupational attendance with positive psychological orientation. During one evening period, however, optimistic disposition experienced deterioration. Human congregation had formed in proximity to vertical transportation adjacent to neighboring residential quarters. Particularly notable was a geriatric female exhibiting profound emotional distress, receiving attempted consolation from an adipose female companion. What alternative outcome could reasonably be anticipated? The longevity of Stalk exceeded probabilistic expectations, was overheard. Intent to circumnavigate the assembly formed, though anonymity within confined architectural space appeared improbable. Salutations. What circumstances precipitate this gathering? I inquired. You maintain residential proximity to Stalk, correct? The female responded interrogatively. Affirmative, apparently so. Biological termination has occurred, she communicated with resignation. This informational transfer produced astonishment and psychological distress, despite interpersonal strain characterizing relations with Semyonovich. What causative factors applied? Self-induced asphyxiation through suspension. Remarkable. Even my anticipatory capacity had not extended to such behavioral prediction. While Stalk exemplified chronic ethanol dependency, religious adherence remained consistent. Religious institution attendance, devotional practices, and nutritional contributions to ceremonial observances remained within his behavioral repertoire. Semyonovich engaged in self-termination? How reconcile this with his theological adherence, which categorizes such actions as significant moral transgression? Moral categorization notwithstanding, events transpired as described. Ethanol consumption likely reached critical threshold, the female concluded, as the geriatric female supplemented. Recent communications from Stalk referenced residential occupation by an entity malevolent in nature, morphologically resembling diminutive humanoid featuring disproportionate cranial development. Maternal figure, supernatural postulation lacks credibility. Reduced ethanol consumption represented necessity. Alcohol-induced perceptual distortion warranted medical intervention. Conversational continuity maintained as the geriatric female resumed emotional expression. Upon auditory reception of this exchange, significant physiological discomfort manifested. I executed comprehensive security measures, activated maximal illumination, and engaged in tobacco consumption, recognizing the inadequacy of alcohol-induced hallucinatory explanation. Ethanol consumption bore no causal relationship to the described phenomena. Thank you all for watching this video. Since I recently started writing and posting my stories, I would greatly appreciate if you wrote in the comments what should be changed, what you liked or disliked. You can also suggest your own stories or simply write what kinds of stories you would like to see on my channel in the future, because what I do is for my viewers. For you. This will really help me create exactly the stories that will interest you. Also, subscribe and like. We, LL, hear each other in the next story.